So we actually have a few minutes, and I would be absolutely delighted to take any questions you might have. Yes, a question. Mike. Ooh, and I'll have a glass of water.
Thank you for your magnificent presentation. My question is this. I use a vegan meatball. They have chicken, a mycoprotein, corn, Q-U-O-R-N. How do you feel about that as a product?
Yeah, corn, where I am in Canada, we can't get that. It's like you say, it's a mycoprotein product. Very, very controversial. Some people react to it. And to be honest with you, I haven't looked into it with great enough depth to feel really confident in saying don't eat it or it's safe. Has anybody else seen anything that might be helpful? I guess the bottom line is if you're using meat analogs, you want to choose sort of the least processed meat analogs you can if it's available. So we see in burgers, we see black bean quinoa burgers, or we see burgers that are made of soy protein. If you're choosing a very meat-like product, at the very least, you want it to be organic. And the reason is a lot of these proteins are extracted with harsh chemicals like hexane, which is a neurotoxin. And so if you choose organic, they do not use those kinds of dangerous chemicals to extract the soy protein. And I would never say, while we're on the topic, and I brought it up, the topic of soy, there are a lot of strong anti-soy sentiments. Even in the plant-based world. Most of them you can trace back to the Weston A. Price Foundation and the work of Mary Innig and Sally Fallon. And one of the concerns I have is that we actually have a truckload of evidence on soy, and the truckload of evidence is pretty favorable. So what we know about soy, and again, if you're using soy, stick to organic soy. I would say that for sure. And the less processed forms of soy, like edamame, tempeh, tofu, those kinds of soy products, organic. And so what do we know about soy? Well, we know that women from Asia who consume soy on a regular basis have considerably less breast cancer. Young children and adolescents who consume soy during that time of their life have a significantly lower risk of lifetime risk of breast cancer. Women who have breast cancer and consume soy have less recurrence and less chance of dying of the breast cancer. We know that men who have aggressive prostate or at risk for aggressive prostate cancer have about a 50% risk reduction if they're regular soy consumers. Men with for less aggressive types of prostate cancer, it's about a 30% risk reduction. We know that soy reduces blood cholesterol levels and is much easier on the kidney than than any animal protein, that's for sure. And we've even got some evidence that it can reduce male pattern baldness and reduce symptoms of menopause. And again, if you do the acid test, 2 of the 5 blue zones consume soy on a regular basis. The Okinawans and the Seventh-day Adventist vegetarians. And the Okinawans consume 2 servings of soy a day. And they consume that not just fermented soy, they consume tofu, and they consume miso, which is fermented. So I think just to be, because one of the things that I get concerned about when we say, eliminate everything, is that the intake of soy gives more variety. It's a very high quality, very versatile protein source, and it allows for just a much more, for many people, enjoyable diet because it's a really good substitute for meat. And it has that texture if you have really firm tofu, for example, or tempeh. So it allows greater variation and is a good quality food. So at least that's from my experience and the literature searches that I've done. So, any other questions? Yes.
I just heard that with women who had breast cancer, they were advised not to use soy.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And they were advised because soy contains what we call selective estrogen receptor modulators. And what that means is that the phytoestrogens in soy serve as weak estrogens in some tissues and anti-estrogen in other tissues. And in breast tissue, we've now learned that it serves more as an anti-estrogen. So it actually attaches to estrogen receptor sites and keeps the really potent human estrogen off, which is very, increases cancer growth. It acts as more of a weak estrogen in bone tissue, for example, which is a good thing. It helps to build bone. So we don't know how significant that is, but it seems to do that. Now, in 2012, the evidence became so overwhelming in favor of soy with breast cancer that the American Cancer Society and the American Institute of Cancer Research actually released statements saying women don't have to worry about soy anymore. As a matter of fact, it's probably protective.
Did you just say that soy helps with bone growth? Did you say that?
Well,
No.
the studies are limited, but what I'm saying is it seems to act as a weak estrogen in bones, and that weak estrogen increases, increases bone density. So there's some thinking that soy may be protective in that way as well.
What is the attitude of your son towards meat now?
Oh, what is my son's opinion or his view towards meat now? The story continues. I mean, I can remember when he was 16 years old and we went to my parents' place and they were doing barbecuing meat. And we brought our veggie stuff to do. And I can still remember him running down the stairs crying because he just couldn't stand it. He just couldn't stand it. I can remember one time being on a plane with him, and he was even a little bit older, and they were serving chicken or whatever it was, and I just saw the tears coming down. He is a very hardcore vegan. That's it.
I've had breast cancer, triple positive HER2 cancer, and my doctor now has me on Arimidex for 10 years. Do you think being on a vegan diet with no soy or very little soy, that it's really necessary to be on an estrogen suppressor?
Oh, well, soy is an estrogen suppressor. So I wouldn't be saying you need to eliminate soy by any stretch, because even people on tamoxifen, they do better with soy in their diet than without. The studies are very clear on that. We have a lot of studies now. So on a vegan diet, whether you have soy or not, I don't know. I haven't seen studies that would show that you do not need to be on to me, soy that's what it is. Because it attaches to estrogen receptor sites, it keeps estradiol off, which, is the dangerous estrogen, is the human estrogen, not the soy estrogen. It protects us against the human estrogens attaching to those receptor sites. It's doing the same job as the drug you're on. Okay, so just to realize that. So I don't know. I wouldn't be comfortable saying that you should go off that medication. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry? Yeah, so if you go on to PubMed and just put in soy breast cancer, you will see dozens of studies come up Just put soy, breast cancer, and you'll see them all. Very, very clear.
What is it about the Okinawans that live the longest? What is it special about their diet? Because I know they eat like 70% of sweet potatoes. What is it? I know sweet potato has almost every vitamin you can imagine. But so what is it that they do? Because I know they don't have any blenders. I don't think they use any juicers. And I think they don't, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what
Yeah, no,
what
it's a
is it
great-
about them, their diet, that they can go to 100 and still be working in the fields?
Yeah, yeah. And you know what I think it is? I think largely no processed foods, and they are lean. They do not overconsume this. So they call it hairy hatchy boo. Stop eating when you're 80% full. They're very, very lean, and they stay fit. They keep constantly active. But in terms of diet, what they're doing is about 60% of their calories is from purple sweet potatoes, or was. I mean, their diet has changed. The Okinawa is not the traditional Okinawa that is a blue zone. It's changing rapidly, which is very unfortunate. There's even, we see, little pieces on, you can look on YouTube and you can see the centenarians, that their kids are dying. Their 70-year-olds are dying of heart disease now because they've changed their way of life so much. But the traditional Okinawans, the purple sweet potatoes, they ate 2 servings of soy a day. They ate seaweeds. They ate a little bit of rice, but it wasn't a primary food. They ate a ½ an ounce of fish, which is a very, very tiny amount. And their portions were fairly small. And of course, they ate a variety of vegetables and such. And miso was their diet. But also, one of the things about the blue zones is the social aspects. I mean, if you've ever read one of the other books that I think is just absolutely beautifully written is Healthy at 100 by John Robbins. And he looks at the Vilcabambans and the Abkhazians and several of the other long-lived peoples in the world. And it's just so much. I think he brings it out more brilliantly than anyone about the social aspects of longevity and the respect for seniors and for elders and the way they're treated and just the social engagement within these long-lived populations. I don't think we can underestimate the value of that. Steve?
I've seen recommendations that say that men should only eat a certain amount of soy.
Yes. Oh, thanks for that, Steve. Now, I'll tell you, everybody should only eat a certain amount of soy. Okay, so the recommendations, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. For children, we say just 1 or 2 servings a day because they have little bodies and phytoestrogens can get too many quickly. I one time dealt with a couple, actually a physician couple, whose 4-year-old girl was probably consuming 10 servings a day, and she had actually started to bleed. So way too many phytoestrogens. So in children, fairly small amounts. In adults, the recommendation is 2 to 4 servings a day as being very safe amount. Now, in men, there were 2 studies that showed men getting sort of feminization from like growing breasts and feminization from consuming soy. In one of the studies, I believe the guy was eating 12 servings of soy a day, and in the other, I think it was 20 servings. It was just ridiculous. I mean, they were just living on soy. That's all they were eating. You can't do that. You shouldn't be doing that with any food. Otherwise, there have been many studies looking at the consequences of soy for men, and it doesn't affect much of anything. It doesn't affect their hormones. It doesn't. As a matter of fact, there's a website which probably you are all familiar with called nutritionfacts.org. Michael Greger. He's got some wonderful little clips on soy and men. So he summarizes the data quite nicely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You were talking about soy and this consumption. Where would I look to find information as it relates to like someone who has thyroid disease and underfunctioning thyroid, and not just soy, but also the types of vegetables, the kale and
cruciferous, cruciferous vegetables. So the question about if you have a thyroid disorder and the goitrogens that are present in food that combine, that can actually reduce the uptake of iodine in the production of thyroid hormones. And so these goitrogens are present in a lot of foods. Soy is one of them. But flax seeds are fairly high in goitrogens, especially if they're uncooked. Uncooked cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and kale and Brussels sprouts and so forth. Even nectarines and peaches and strawberries have some goitrogens. There are a lot of millet, a lot of foods contain some goitrogens. If you cook the foods, you reduce the goitrogen, the goitrogenic potential of the food. So with flaxseed, when they're cooked, you reduce the cyanogenic glycosides that are problematic. So generally, you obviously have to be more careful if you have thyroid disease. But one of the things that I would say is, for many people, what we know is goitrogens are not an issue if you get enough iodine. Okay, so it's the combination of a lack of iodine in your diet and a lot of goitrogens that can put you into trouble. So if your iodine status is adequate, you can usually handle a reasonable amount of goitrogens, including some soy and some cruciferous vegetables. So and what happens, we do see this especially in Europe, where the soil levels of iodine are a little lower. Where people go on a very healthy plant-based, whole food plant-based diet, but don't include a source of iodine because they don't want to use iodized salt, which is, sort of the vehicle of fortification with iodine for the population. They remove that. And a lot of people, seaweed is just ew. Just the thought of seaweed, they don't like that fishy taste, and so they don't use seaweed because it's another natural source of iodine. And so if you've eliminated, you don't eat seaweed and you're not using iodized salt, you can end up with problems with thyroid. So just be aware of that. Make sure that you've got a reliable source of iodine in your diet. So what do I recommend as a diet for babies? Okay, I think all babies, the thing, I focus a lot on diet and disease reversal. And so when you're looking at disease reversal, the number one goal is to, stop the harmful components coming in. Where babies and children are concerned, you need to change your focus. The focus has got to be ensuring adequate growth and development. Brain development, muscle development. You've got to make sure that the child has adequate nutrition. That's your top priority. So you need to be very careful about being overly restrictive with fat. And you need to make sure that you've got a source of the key nutrients that could be low on a plant-based diet. So a plant-based diet for young children. And the other thing is, young children have fairly small stomachs. They need to eat a little more often, and they may need a little bit more concentrated sources of calories, especially on a vegan diet. So if you look at the literature and you look at failures, vegan children that have failed to thrive, we see a couple of researchers that looked at populations. There was a Black Hebrew population. There was a microbiotic population for a while, and in almost every case of failure to thrive in vegan infants, what's happening is they're using just a completely inadequate milk for the baby. So the milk might have, 17 or 20 calories per 100 mils instead of the, 100 that it should, or 70 that it should. So it's just grossly inadequate formula. So number one is, if at all possible, breastfeed for at least 2 years. Okay, number one, because you will be providing the baby with, the essential fatty acids, the type of protein, the nutrients that are really important for an infant, and the protection that is really important for an infant. So I would say child-led weaning is wonderful. Normal human breastfeeding or nursing is 2 to 4 years. 2 to 4 years is normal and natural for humans. Less than a year is not so good. If you stop breastfeeding before a year, you must use a commercial infant formula. And if you've ever seen the ingredients on these things, they're not great. Okay, so you really want to do whatever you can do to breastfeed, and preferably for a full 2 years. Once that's taken care of, by 6 months of age, you need solid foods. So some people try to go beyond that, but what happens is by 4 to 6 months, iron stores are running out. Breast milk is not a very rich, the iron in breast milk is very, very bioavailable, as is everything in breast milk. But nonetheless, there's not a lot there, and babies can start to get iron deficient. And iron deficiency means brain deficiency, so you just don't want to fool around with that. So what's a reasonable source of iron? Well, now pediatric associations are saying meat. To make meat the first food, which just kills me. But anyway, it's ridiculous. It sets them up for an unhealthy microflora. It just does all kinds of things that are not good. So first food, you can use, iron-rich vegetables or iron-fortified infant cereals would be a reasonable choice. And then you want to start right away getting in the vegetables and a variety of vegetables. You don't have to worry about, we used to worry about high nitrate vegetables for babies when we were starting with solids when they were really little. But when you're doing this sort of feeding starting at 6 months, it's not as big of an issue. And then the other thing that's very controversial right now is, do you need to puree food? And if you start at 6 months, you actually probably don't. You can mash foods. You can let babies, my daughter did this kind of child-led. I mean, her little girl is always fed herself pretty much. She puts the food down and the baby feeds herself. And she loves beans. She loves, and that's one of the first foods as well. Beans would be a very good food to start with. You want to start with beans fairly quickly, by at least 7 months. And a variety of beans. So that's a really, really important food. And you can do some tofu as well. But you just want to get variety in there and make sure that you're not doing a lot of foods that have very little value, because babies tend to eat such little quantity. You want everything that crosses their lips to be of value. Canned milk? No. I'm talking about commercial infant formula, period. That's it. Well, you can get soy-based or dairy-based, or you can get these, amino acid, the hydrolyzed. Anyway, these are not your first choice by any stretch, but you should not do a homemade infant formula, because whenever we see very sad stories of infants dying or infants with severe malnutrition, it's almost always because parents have been overly restrictive or given them a homemade infant formula that is grossly inadequate nutrition. So they need to get the nutrients, and you need to make sure vitamin B12 is absolutely critical. So if you're nursing, you need to make sure you've got a source of B12, because your baby without B12, if you're not taking B12 and you're nursing your baby, within months, your baby could have irreversible brain damage. Okay, so it's nothing to fool around with. Your baby needs a source of B12. Your baby needs vitamin D. And so you should be doing vitamin D drops. And those are really important. And then the source of exogenous iron by 6 months. Those are really important. You're very welcome. One more question? Yeah. Okay, my feelings on canola oil. And canola oil is It was hybridized to remove the uricic acid because uricic acid is poisonous. And so it was hybridized, not genetically modified to produce canola oil. However, probably, the greatest percent of canola oil on the market is genetically modified to be pesticide resistant. So for that reason, if anybody's using canola oil, you would want it to be organic, preferably. But canola oil probably has the lowest amount of saturated fat of any oil. But my take on oils is, oils are highly processed foods taken from whole foods that have very little nutritional value and 120 calories per tablespoon. It's the most, the least nutrient-dense food on the planet. So if you look at nutritional density score charts, at the top of the charts are leafy greens, then non-starchy vegetables, and going down the list, and at the very bottom, below French fries and cheese, you'll find oil, okay? So it has hardly any nutrients and a lot of calories. So my preference is to get most of my fat from whole foods, avocados, nuts, seeds, those kinds of foods, rather than getting it from oils. If you are using oil, a little bit of oil in something, I would say to stick to fresh pressed organic oils, and preferably if you're using them for salads, something with a little bit of omega-3 in it, so you get that essential fatty acid easily absorbed, or something that's mainly mono, rather than something that's omega-6 rich. So omega-6 rich oils are sunflower oil, safflower oil, grapeseed oil, corn oil, soy oil. So those are omega-6 rich oils, and the reason you don't want an omega-6 rich oil is because it tips the balance between omega-6 and omega-3 in the omega-6 direction too much. So you can eat sunflower seeds, you can eat these higher omega-6 rich seeds like poppy seeds and sesame seeds and so on. But you don't want to be downing the oil. So if you're having oil, it's either mono or omega-3 rich. Mono, avocado oil, olive oil would be the high mono oils. Mm-hmm. Really? Oh, yeah, well, they do. There are several companies that do an organic canola oil, but there's still, if you tested it, it's possible that seeds from a GMO flew into their, into their farm and it's contaminated. But I know there are companies that do their best to produce organic. Mm-hmm. Hemp oil hemp seeds are amazing. Hemp as a crop is amazing. It's probably the greenest crop on the planet because basically you don't need pesticides, you don't need herbicides. It grows in 100 days, it's quickly renewable, and you can make 25,000 different products with it. And the food itself, hemp seeds are super high in high quality protein, about 20% of calories from protein. And the ratio between omega-6 and omega-3 is about 3 to 1. It's really good. And the other thing is that hemp seeds contain something called stearidonic acid. And stearidonic acid, so you've got omega-3 is alpha-linolenic acid, the parent fatty acid. The first conversion in that chain to get to EPA and DHA is to stearidonic acid. Well, hemp seed is one of the very few foods that actually contains preformed stearidonic acid. And so the conversion from stearidonic acid to EPA is much more efficient than from alpha-linolenic acid to EPA. So that's another bonus of hemp seeds. Hemp seeds are really a food worth looking at. I use them all the time. So if I'm using almond milk, I'll blend it with some hemp seeds. If I'm making a salad dressing, I blend some hemp seeds in. I use them on a regular basis. I think they're a wonderful food. Okay. Well, thank you very much.